Hello team, this is me, Jonathan MS Pearce, another ATP Geopolitics video. This is the Ukraine War News Update second part. And my goodness, there's a lot of content coming out today, reacting to things happening in US politics, reacting to that big cargo plane getting taken down in Belgrade, and then just an awful lot of content in terms of news. And that's because there's a virtual Ramstein meeting yesterday. I presume is that Lloyd Austin then in the picture? It could mean that he's not missing like Russians might be claiming. He has been, of course, fairly ill of late. Now, there's an awful lot to talk about, so I will probably just do a military aid and equipment segment and then do a geopolitics segment a little later. I again do apologise about the amount of content. It's just the nature of today. Right, we'll start with the Defence Ministry after Ramstein summit saying Ukraine is to receive more long-range weapons. This is good news, although we are lacking in detail. As you can imagine, it's not like that we have to know what's going on. Allies will provide Ukraine this year with more weapons needed to effectively strike Russian targets both on the front line and in the rear, as well as destroy Russia's logistics hubs, Ukraine's Defence Ministry officials have said following the 18th Ramstein summit. Now, straight away, you'll be thinking things like ATACMS, etc., etc. US are going to be in a difficult position at that meeting because they will be wanting to say, we'll give you X, Y, and Z. I mean, we've got it. It's ready to go. It's at the army bases, ready to be stacked on planes. But unfortunately, we haven't got the funding to allow for that at the moment. And as soon as that comes through, you'll get X, Y, and Z. So I don't know how much will be a promissory note from the US point of view from this kind of meeting with regard to what happens going forward, and that will be contingent upon the funding being released. We're going to return to US funding because there's some funky stuff going on that I can't quite get my head around. But anyway, come back to that. So in 2024, Ukraine will receive a weapon that does not yet exist and that will help to strike the Russian military and their logistics hubs. I don't know, have I got reference to this? No. So you might not remember, you might not remember, or you may, some time back, it's probably, was it 2022 or early 2023, the UK government basically put out to tender who can provide a long-range weapon that we can then provide to Ukraine. And they essentially started a competition or a tender for that. And there would have been manufacturers that would have been given a remit. I think the remit went public as well. I think it was like put on government sites for such a weapon. And I wonder whether it could be that the UK or maybe a coalition or whatever has been given a proposal that looks pretty good and have said, yeah, that's what we want so that we can give that to Ukraine. It's not taking from stocks. It's not ordering existing weapons. It's actually, we want something that's bespoke, something that's new, something that fulfills this, and this criteria. Anyway, that's the sort of thing it could be. It helped to strike Russian military and logistics hubs. This was stated by the spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense, Hilarion Pavlyuk, following a meeting of the contact group in the Ramstein format. Quote, a productive meeting. The support continues. There were important statements and commitments. It will continue this year. We will receive weapons that do not exist yet and will help to hit the enemy and logistics hubs. I mean, wow, that sounds pretty good stuff. Right, of course, that means they're going to have to produce those things and probably test them. Well, maybe not. Maybe they've already been tested and we're going to the production phase, but that's not going to be a case of getting a fantastic weapon next month. In 2024, quote, in 2024, Ukraine will receive a new weapon that will help to strike Russian troops and their logistics. And that is the claim that is being reported widely because people are quite excited about it. Okay. German aid to Ukraine says there are now two new capability coalitions for Ukraine, focusing on armor and drones. Both are being led by Germany together with Latvia. This was announced by Department of Defense, German, I presume. This means that after the capability coalition integrated air and missile defense, which Germany leads together with France, Germany will now also lead further capability coalitions. Germany really is playing a central role in the assistance being provided to Ukraine and being central in organizing capabilities for Ukraine. With Vector, RQ-35 Hydron, Primoco 150, Sonobot 5 and Luna NG drone systems, and so far unknown reconnaissance drones, Germany supplies almost 1,000 drones of various types to Ukraine, designed for different mission scenarios. Meanwhile, Germany is a world leader regarding the delivery of main battle tanks and other armoured vehicles to Ukraine. In the field of MBTs alone, Germany was or is directly involved in the delivery of over 100 tanks of various types, Leopard 105, Leopard 2A6, T-72 and M55Ss to Ukraine. Those are the T-55s that were done up by Slovenia. It was an Israeli company that did that. Transparency note, even though the DoD website states that both coalitions will be jointly led by Germany and Latvia, quote, the Defense Scoop quotes Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, Celeste Wallander, as saying that Germany will only lead the Capability Coalition armour and Latvia will only lead the Capability Coalition drones. Right, okay, let's go a few more German bits and pieces. The German government has financed 2 demining vehicles and further equipment for the State Emergency Services Ukraine. The Halo Trust, they are this charity that is demining in Ukraine at the moment, provided the vehicles and were provided with the vehicles and equipment which now support the humanitarian demining work. Why demining is so important is because, yeah, obviously saves lives, etc. But it's all about farming and agriculture, and mines are getting in the way of Ukraine's biggest source of income, which is agricultural produce. It needs to be able to export agri products, and demining is what will enable that to happen more effectively. Germany will now hand over military hand over military helicopters to Ukraine, according to German Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius, who I saw an interview with yesterday. I was like, why do I keep recognizing Boris Pistorius? It's Tom Williamson, the actor. It's just died, actually, British actor Tom Williamson. That's who he looks like. Anyway, according to him, Ukraine will receive 6 Sea King Mk-41 multi-purpose helicopters. So Sea Kings, the UK has provided 3 Sea Kings we no longer use. Gathering dust, might as well give them to they're decent, reliable helicopters. Might as well give them to Ukraine to do troop transportations. Things you don't need helicopters right at the front line for. We've used them for air sea rescue and all sorts historically, and obviously in war. In fact, my mate was a Sea King helicopter pilot. There you go, fun fact. He's now an SC rescue pilot. He's come out in the armed forces. Helicopters, they'll give these Sea King helicopters along with a set of spare parts and will also provide training. So Germany's really coming up trumps at the moment. Now Latvia, as we just mentioned, in charge of this drones coalition, has allocated 15.6 million euros to cover the cost of that that municipal authorities encounter in connection with the reception and support of refugees from Ukraine. So this is within Latvia. Latvian Ministry of Environment and Regional Development reports. Now, when we talk about support for Ukraine from other countries, we too often think in terms of military aid and money given to Ukraine. And so you have these comparisons of different nations. But of course, those nations that are closest to Ukraine will be spending an awful lot on Ukrainian refugees. That'll either be in direct funding like this. So this is 15.6 million euros, right? That's to do X, Y, and Z. But it's also going to be in terms of like increased welfare budgets. It's going to be education. Schools are going to be bursting at the seams in certain areas due to Ukrainian refugees. It'll be unemployment benefit for those families, and etc. Healthcare costs adding on. The countries neighbouring Ukraine are bearing the largest burden for those things, and we need to take that into account when we talk about holistically trying to understand who is giving what help to Ukraine. Right, Slovakia, this is so bleeding important, will not block the allocation of 50 billion euros of aid to Ukraine from the EU, and they will allow Ukraine's purchase of weapons from Slovak businesses and will not interfere with Ukraine's accession to the EU, Prime Minister Shmyhal reports. This is absolutely fantastic. So Shmyhal, the Ukrainian Prime Minister, has met with Robert Fico. Uncomfortable handshakes and all that. No, there was a big worry about, and there is, it's just a general worry with Slovakia because they appear to be emulating Viktor Orban's Hungary. However, this is is huge. Like, they're not going to stand in the way, and it looks like they will contribute to, or at least they're not saying that they won't, to the 50 billion euro package to Ukraine. And they are not going to stand in the way of Ukraine acceding to the EU. This is big. All right, really good. Right, we're going to move on to the US. So John Kirby has said the next few months will be critical for Ukraine. Yep, White House expresses concern about Ukraine's lack of weapons, and Russia is building up its military potential. And let's actually dip into something to what he has to say here. And
stuff out of the sky, things get through. Obviously, they don't have everything. But that's why it's so critical that we get this supplemental funding. Because as I said earlier, the Ukrainians are making some tough decisions on the battlefield about what they're going to shoot and what they're going to save for another day. And the Russians know that. So part of this is trying to break the back of the Ukrainian people, but also trying to force the Ukrainians to continue to use munitions in defense of themselves.
Is the U.S. seeing evidence that Russia is increasingly targeting Ukrainian arms production sites? And if so, what does that mean?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked that question. They have, in fact, we have seen them start to go after more of Ukraine's defense industrial base. Again, all of a piece of wearing down the Ukrainians' ability out of this.
So, yeah, really important. It's a recognition that the Russians have changed the switch from sort of targeting energy infrastructure to hitting defense military industrial complex, which I think is sensible for the Russians to do from their point of view. But this is Russia's trying to overextend the Ukrainian air defense systems, and they are, by the way, quite effective. I presume that means that the Ukrainian air defense systems are effective, but it could also mean that the Russians are effective at stretching the Ukrainian air defenses. So military aid deliveries are critical for Ukraine right now. They have to make the hard choices about which targets to shoot down and which ones to save. It's such a difficult position for the Ukrainians to be in. They desperately need those resources, that materiel from allies, particularly the US. The US has, Andrew Perpetual was talking about this on one of his live streams yesterday, saying like the ammunition and the weapons that the US have given to Ukraine don't even touch the sides of the US. It's like they've got so much ammunition that it's not an issue. It's not a security risk at all for the US to give what they've given. They've got cluster munitions that they're never going to use. They've just got millions of shells. It's just, they need to get rid of them. You either pay to dispose of them, or you give them to Ukraine. Give them to Ukraine. Well, let's facilitate that, please. The lack of funding affects not only the ability of the US to send new weapons to Ukraine, but also, and this is important and also bad news, it also affects the ability to help repair the ones that were previously provided. Spokesman for the US Department of Defense, Patrick Ryder, has said in a briefing, which is to say that the money stuck in Congress means that they aren't getting new ammunition and they aren't repairing existing bits of kit, American equipment. Then we have the Washington Post with an opinion piece, failure to aid Ukraine risks disaster for Kyiv and the US. So it's this, issue of not, unfortunately, getting enough equipment, and having the roughly 64 billion, it says. Well, let's read this. Congressional leaders reached an agreement Sunday on a $1.66 trillion dollar budget deal. So that this was previously raising hopes of averting a partial government shutdown. Now it's imperative that Congress reaches an agreement on foreign aid bill that, in addition to funding for Israel and Taiwan, includes roughly $64 billion in vital military, economic, and humanitarian support for Ukraine. US funds for Ukraine have run out. If Congress fails to act, the implications for Ukraine and the world are worrying. The consequences of the USA cutoff will be nothing short of catastrophic. Alina Polyakova, president of the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, told me, quote, Ukrainians won't stop fighting, but they will eventually lose the war without US support. Many more innocent Ukrainians will be brutally murdered. Ukraine under Russian control, either politically or militarily, would mean Russia at NATO and EU borders. It would mean a US that is greatly diminished as a global leader. I think a Russian win in Ukraine is, frankly, the end of US global leadership. That's a massive call, and the question by the author here is she overstating the case? And then says, I don't think so. A US failure to support now with the aid bill that amounts to about 1% of federal outlays would be the greatest self-inflicted US foreign policy error since at least the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and its geopolitical ramifications would be even greater. The biggest impact, of course, will be felt in Ukraine, but obviously it goes beyond that. So I think, is there anything else to add? I mean, it's stuff that we already know, right? Jack Watling of the Royal United Services Institute in London told me, quote, "The Russians are in no positions to attack Kiev today, but they could be by 2025. That is their intention. The worst case scenario is an immediate cut-off of US aid, resulting in a slow deterioration of Ukrainian forces over 2024 and a collapse in 2025 as Russia expands the active fronts. The more immediate consequence of a US aid cut-off might be felt not at the front, but in Ukraine's major cities, which are once again the target of a brutal Russian air campaign against kamikaze, using kamikaze drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles. Russia is ramping up its own missile production and has already received missiles from North Korea while working to acquire more from Iran. So, you know, if the Ukrainians don't get those air defense missiles and supplies, then it means that those cities will become increasingly under threat. And that includes, as John Kirby said, the military-industrial complex that will be increasingly vulnerable. So on and so forth. There are lots more to say from that article, but we will continue. Now, this is the part I don't quite get. So this sounds like a plan B. If the supplemental aid bill fails in Congress, President Biden can aid Ukraine using his unlimited EDA, Excess Defense Articles authority, the right to sell or give away military hardware that the US forces no longer need, and refers to this Forbes article. So we are going to pop into this Forbes article and see what it has to say, that it could mean that there's a bit of hope for the Ukrainians, even if Congress don't agree on anything. Okay, let's whiz through. This is another David Axe article in Forbes. I do like the fact that Forbes are doing this. Excess weapons, whether or not the House of Representatives likes it. Okay, so Republicans aren't negotiating, or more accurately extorting from a position of strength, because Biden has a de facto veto over their veto of aid to Ukraine. One he either doesn't yet fully appreciate or more likely is saving for an emergency. It's a classification for older weaponry the US government calls, quote, Excess Defense Articles, or EDA. The government has the legal authority to sell extremely cheaply or even give away any US military hardware that US forces no longer need. Biden only rarely has used his EDA authority to send weapons to Ukraine. Instead, he has leaned more heavily on a separate presidential drawdown authority to send to Ukraine newer weapons that US forces otherwise might still use. But the way Biden has used PDA requires the Pentagon immediately to pay for replacement weapons for its own forces. Is money for those replacements, as well as financing for other arms production for Ukraine, that Biden largely is asking for in his supplemental funding proposal. All that is to say, Biden needs Republicans if he's going to continue supporting Ukraine via his drawdown authority. He doesn't need Republicans if he instead falls back on his EDA authority. In other words, with the presidential drawdown, you say, right, we're going to send all these javelins out to you, and then we're going to buy newer javelins for ourselves. Or we're going to send this out to you, which is a slightly older variant, and we're going to get a newer variant in ourselves. So we are upgrading our own capabilities, but these are things that we could use in a war. They are sitting in warehouses, but they're usable. Those Bradleys are usable, but actually what we're going to do is give you those Bradleys and buy some newer variant of maybe that Bradley, just a newer upgraded version. And so that money is effectively not money for Ukraine. It's money for upgrading the US armed forces. That's what I keep trying to explain about the money to Ukraine isn't money to Ukraine. It's money to the US. So the US gets an upgraded armed forces, and the Ukrainians get a bunch of weaponry. But this one would be giving or selling weaponry to Ukraine that is slightly older, obsolete weaponry that they no longer need. Now, this might end up being the same weaponry, just like reclassified. I wonder if that would happen. But certainly ATACMS, I would have thought, would be, with the new PrISM coming online, those ATACMS are effectively obsolete. So you could say, right, we're literally giving ATACMS to Ukraine, or we're going to sell them a bunch of 100 ATACMS for like $1 million. And Ukraine would be like, yeah, thank you very much. So if he uses EDA, goodness me, I mean, this is brilliant. But I've not heard this be talked about. What are the caveats that one must apply to this? I don't know. But anyway, to continue, apparently growing impatient, Biden, this is much later in the article, Biden called Mike Johnson, Speaker of the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, called Johnson and other congressional leaders to a closed-door meeting on Wednesday, the main subject of which was Ukraine. Johnson emerged less strident than when he entered. Quote, "We understand the necessity about Ukraine funding," he said, which I think is important. I was telling you then that I think they would be letting on some kind of secrets, some intelligence to some of those people to just say, this is how serious it is. This is how important it is geopolitically. I know you're arguing to toss about this on the border, but actually, this is hardcore, and I think that may have changed some people's perceptions. I just hope that remains. We don't know what Biden said to Johnson, but it's possible to explain that there still are legal tools at Biden's disposal for sending military aid to Ukraine, tools that don't require Johnson and his party to do anything. It's possible, in other words, that Biden played the EDA card and emphasized to Johnson that there are two potential outcomes as Russia's wider war on Ukraine grinds toward its third year and Ukrainian troops run low on weaponry. One, Johnson and his fellow Republicans can trade new border policies for $61 billion in Ukraine aid and win this political game, or they can withhold aid, compel Biden to lean on his EDA authority and get nothing in return as fresh aid begins to flow. So that's really interesting. So Biden might have said, this is good speculation here, but again, speculation. Biden might have said, look, if you don't do the deal that we've put to you with regard to reform on the border, then we're just going to give stuff away by EDA anyway, and we won't do the reform on the border. I think this is potentially just, if I was Biden, this would be the hand I'd play. This looks really good, which is like, do the deal that we have agreed upon as Democrats, which is quite a lot of concessions by the sounds of it. We will concede a load of stuff for the border. You release $61 billion. Or if you say no to that, we aren't doing jack on the border, and we'll release that funding anyway or that weaponry anyway through EDA. And there'll be nothing you can do about it. So you've got that choice, Johnson. You need to go back to the Republicans and express the situation to them such that it is incumbent upon them and you to agree to do the deal. The list of military hardware Biden could donate or sell cheaply to Ukraine is a long one. It grows longer if Ukraine can tap financing from its European allies in order to pay a higher premium for older American weapons. The list includes tanks, fighting vehicles, trucks, naval patrol boats, and even retired F-16 fighters. Enough weaponry to keep Ukrainian forces in the fight for years. There are laws and regulations that apply to the EDA transfer process, but they're fungible. The president can give away old weapons that have no commercial value, but the recipient has to pay for shipping. The law also limits the total annual value of EDA transfers to just $500 million. So it's again how it all gets totted up, really. But the same law doesn't strictly dictate how government officials value a particular excess weapon. This is what I was saying. If the Biden administration decides, say, a 1980s vintage M1A1 tank, thousands of which are in storage in US Army arsenals, is worth just a few $1,000s, there's not much that lawmakers can do to stop Biden from sending hundreds of M1s to Ukraine on trains and ships that Ukraine charters. If Republicans have healthy political instincts, they'll vote for the forthcoming Senate immigration compromise and unlock aid to Ukraine. If they don't have healthy political instincts, and Biden does, the next big batches of American weapons for Ukraine could come from the vast stocks of excess defense articles. Let me know what you think about this. I think this is incredibly interesting, important, and makes a lot of sense of what might be going on behind closed doors. And that leaves me in a much better mood than I was last night. US Department of Treasury announces, and this is the other thing. Okay, I get that, but I'm not quite sure where this is coming from. The US Department of Treasury announces $11.8 billion in additional funding for Ukraine. According to Reuters, the US Treasury Department says in a statement following an online meeting with the Ukrainian Prime Minister Shmyhal that US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, quote, stressed the importance of Congress taking action as soon as possible to provide additional financial support for Ukraine. So the Biden administration intends to provide $11.8 billion in budget support to Ukraine as part of a request for additional funding to cover the budget deficit, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said. So I don't know if that's on top of the $61 or $64 billion package, there's another 11.8 that would be added, or is this 11.8 that we're going to give now through some other mechanism to support the budget, Ukrainian budget, which is in a lot of trouble? I don't know. Perhaps you can help me on that. Now, Dmitry Kuleba, who is the foreign minister for Ukraine, said the situation is very serious, perhaps even more serious than it has been since the start of the Russian invasion almost 2 years ago. And he's talking about the lack of supplies. This is not good. The situation is not good for the Ukrainians. All the while, there are other things taking place and other nations helping in many ways. Canada will provide Ukraine with 10 Zodiac rigid hull inflatable boats, or RIBs, valued at approximately $20 million. Delivery expected in late spring. Canada will also contract Montreal-based Top Aces Inc. to assist the F-16 training coalition. And I wonder if that's a kind of a private entity, like a... There was talk about the possibility of actually getting together an F-16 mercenary unit where you can have experienced F-16 pilots who are up for fighting in a war, paid to go and do mercenary work in Ukraine. And that was gathering a little bit of momentum ages ago, but I haven't heard much about it since. Right. Now, Australia's had this nightmare with the Taipans, right? But this could be a goer. So Taipans were these helicopters that had problems. They decided to get rid of them, bury them in Australia. And then after they'd made that decision, started, I guess, dismantling them. The Ukrainians like, yeah, we'll have them. And then everyone's like, yeah, they need Taipans. And the Australian government were like, no. And they were like, why not? No. And it turns out they basically rendered them inoperable. So, they had to carry on burying them, as far as I understand. But now Australia is receiving 75 Abrams this year, which would be the M2, but it means that 59 N1A1, AIM are export ready and could be transferred to Ukraine. So these are the older Abrams tanks. So hoping that the Prime Minister, says this person, and his local MP don't waste this opportunity like the Taipan helicopters they are burying. This could be really cool, like 59. Okay, it's another tank they've got to get to know how to use. It's another tank that they've got to get logistics sorted for. But if you can say, right, here are 60 M1A1 tanks that are export ready to go, we can get them to Ukraine. I'm sure Ukraine go, another tank, but another tank, yeah, we'll take that. Now, North Korea supplies Russia with shells better than the West supplies Ukraine, according to Dmitry Kuleba. So we just heard from him a little bit. This is an interview with Die Bild, which is a German tabloid newspaper. The main theses of the Ukrainian foreign minister. So one, contrary to Ukraine's build-up of its own production, the Western defense industry cannot produce enough ammunition. They are trying, but it's just not going to be there yet. I don't know whether it means just ever or whether just in the right time frame they can't. Two, the current level of production does not meet neither the needs of the war in Ukraine nor the defense needs of your countries themselves. So at the moment where they're at, you can't do enough for us and you can't do enough for yourselves. Three, North Korea is a more effective partner for Russia than our friends who supply Ukraine with artillery ammunition. I don't think that's a dig. That's just an observation of the situation. Is North Korea are able to just keep giving Russia ammunition after ammunition cargo. Four, when making decisions, we see our partners sometimes drowning in endless discussions. There is no time. Yep. There is a time for discussion and there's also a time for action. And there's a lot of frustration that orders aren't placed. There's a lot of rhetoric. We're going to support you for as long as it takes. But on the other hand, not putting the orders in. Officials should stop theorizing about the fifth point, about a possible Russian victory, because Germany and other countries will be next. And seven, we don't need tourist missiles to attack Moscow. We need them to destroy logistics behind enemy lines in Ukraine. So that's a kind of like, please give us tourists. We will use them within Ukraine. Now, some good news for the Ukrainians here. Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, reports that a new drone counter system has been developed for the Ukrainians. It generates white noise that makes Russian drones uncontrollable. The radius of operation is about 250 meters. It's already in serial production. Whack that on vehicles and then suddenly things look better for the Ukrainians. If that is the case, if they can do that, if this works and it can be scaled, wow, that alone could be a game changer. Could just be absolutely phenomenal. Right. I did report this. I showed one of these that was in a lot newer condition than that one. This is obviously taking a few blasts from a few mines, but still going. This is the Ukrainian remotely controlled mine clearing vehicles with its flailing chains at the front. I wouldn't stand behind that. While it's flailing stuff out of the ground into your face. But, far be it from me to advise people on health and safety. There you go. So that is being used, and that's really good news. Obviously, a lot quicker, you would think, than walking through these fields as people. The 15 RQ-35 Hydron reconnaissance drones, these are German drones that we have been raising funds for, are already in Ukraine, says Luke Skywalker. Thank you all for your constant support of Ukraine and its defenders. Join me in a fight of light against darkness. Nice reference to Star Wars. This is Mark Hamill, who does a lot of work on behalf of United 24, and they are getting drones consistently to the Ukrainians on the front line. Now, according to Forces Operation, 100,000 155mm ammunition were fired by Caesars. These are the French self-propelled howitzers between the spring of 2022 and November 2023. That was for 40 Caesars. So you got 40 Caesars. And they're firing 100. They have fired 100,000 shells in that time period. Now imagine what you're going to need for 120 Caesars, as they will have. So another 80 to add to that. We're going to need a bigger boat full of ammunition. That is a lot of 155mm artillery shells that they're going to need. And I refer you back to what Dmitry Kuleba says. I mean, this is the thing about getting fancy new self-propelled guns is one thing, but actually, do they have the ammunition to fire from them? Is the other. Estonia has joined the UK-led training operation for Ukrainian soldiers. Estonia, this is the Operation Interflex that UK has been doing. It's now trained between 30 and 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers, some of them in particular areas like paratroopers and Marines, I think, or certainly Marines and Special Forces in the UK, but also just general training with the help of people from a number of different countries, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, etc., etc. Well, now Estonia's become the 12th member to participate in Operation Interflex, which is good, and that's come out of the Ramstein meeting as well. Okay, coming towards the end of this video, goodness me, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking today. The Russian situation is not too much to report. This is another one of these it's not really SAM, it's not surface air missile, but look at these. It's absolutely incredible. These are, as far as I understand them, ship-to-ship missile weapons, right? So you'd normally see that on the front of a frigate or something like that, firing at another ship. Well, now they've whacked these on top of an MTLB or something, and it is the case of the Russians doing this. Now, I never laugh at weapons like this. I laugh, I don't really laugh, but I say, what does this tell you? It's not that these aren't capable and you can't use them and they can't blow things up. Of course they can. But it tells you, if you're going to the extent where you are looking in scrapyards, in military scrapyards for these missile systems and whacking them on top of an old APC, what is your context? Why are you having to do that? And of course it says that they are desperate for weapons. Yep, this weapon can blow stuff up, but you are so desperate to have to do this. That shows that you have a lack of quality weaponry otherwise. And here you've got one on the back of a truck. So Russian improvised multiple rocket launcher with an RBU 6,213mm anti-submarine rocket launcher established on a Ural truck. And so we've got them on tracked vehicles, on trucks. This is something they're doing, and I guess that's fine, but where are you at? New York Times reports that Russia is using relatively accurate, recently designed North Korean missiles against Ukraine. Again, what is being done about this? What is South Korea doing about this? What is the UN doing about this? This is against the UN resolution. How are Russia just able to flagrantly break UN Security Council resolutions whilst also sitting as a permanent seat on the US Security Council? Of course, they shouldn't be on there, arguably, given that they are not the Soviet Union. Right, Ukraine Center for National Resistance says mercenaries from Malaysia have been seen and heard in the occupied territories. They are accompanied by a translator and ex-Wagner types, presumably for training in Russia. In the Russian constitution, mercenaries are illegal. Yeah, right. So that is what Russia's doing. That's a whole lot of news. Ramstein has obviously made things, a lot more. There's a lot of stuff going on. Hopefully that was of use to you. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I'll get on and look at doing. I hope it will be a relatively quick geopolitical news segment. Take care. Speak soon.